I'm going to present a paper of us, which is a systemization of knowledge on attacks on DAOs. And this is joint work with Rainer Feitschinger, Robin Fritsch, Jan von Laten, and Roger Wattenhofer. And we're all from ETH Zurich. Sometimes I like to start by noting that this is ETH Zurich, the university, and not ETH, the cryptocurrency, because it leads to many confusions. What we do in this work is we study attacks on DAOs, so decentralized autonomous organizations. But let's first start by looking at an example of what a DAO might do. So we have 4 individuals here, and they want to come together, and they decide, oh, let's buy a farm. But they all don't fully trust each other. So what they do instead is that they create a DAO, and they all chip into this DAO. So they all provide some tokens to this DAO, and they deploy the DAO on a blockchain, Ethereum in our case. And then all of them will get voting powers in the DAO proportional to the tokens they put in initially. So what might this DAO do then? So there could be proposals in the DAO. So for instance, here we have a proposal from Bob, and Bob puts out a proposal to buy seeds since they want to grow vegetables for 50 coins. And then everyone in the DAO has some time to vote on this proposal. On the slide, you're seeing how the votes were in this case, and this proposal would be passed because the majority of the voting power was in favor. So the DAO goes ahead, buys some seeds, and the treasury of the DAO is only left with 200 coins now. Now we have a new proposal in this DAO, which comes from Dave, and Dave wants to buy a tractor for 200 coins. It might seem a bit much here because this is all we have left in the DAO, but Dave is still in favor of this proposal. 2 of the other members of the DAO, however, are against it. But we have a different problem now, which is that Bob is not online. Potentially he's on vacation and not checking the activity of the DAO, because in a DAO you don't really know when votes will be. Not anyone, but token holders with enough tokens can create a proposal at any time, and then voting will start with some delay. So you don't know ahead of time when you have to pay attention to the DAO. And now in the absence of Bob's vote here, what happens is that this proposal gets passed. However, this was actually a malicious proposal. They obfuscated the real purpose. Instead of buying a tractor, what the proposal did really is just transfer him the 200 coins. So the DAO was attacked, the treasury is empty now. In the real world, DAOs probably, and not as in our toy example, govern DeFi protocols and not farms, but there are over 19,000 out there on blockchains, so they do many different things. There's a lot of voting going on, a lot of decisions being made, and they're controlling quite a bit in their treasuries. So they're controlling $30 billion in their treasuries altogether. And what you might think now, well, what can go wrong? Obviously, things went wrong in our toy example, but how does it look in the real world? Well, it turns out a lot is going wrong with DAOs as well in the real world, or at least occasionally. The very first DAO, the DAO, was actually very famously attacked, which led to a fork of the Ethereum blockchain. And DAOs have been attacked ever since. So the ones that you see on this slide is really only a subset of the attacks there have been. And what we wanted to do in this work is now sort of systemize the knowledge that is out there on the threats that DAOs are facing. But before we go right there, there's one more thing I want to touch upon, which is sort of what are the kinds of DAOs that we're focusing on in this work. And basically the DAOs that we're focusing on are DAOs where token holders have voting rights proportional to the amount of governance tokens they hold, and where voting, or at least a subset of voting, happens on the blockchain. So in the very simplest case of this type of DAO, we have our token holders who vote directly on a proposal, so whether they're for, against it, or abstaining, by interacting with the DAO smart contract. But there are also quite a few DAOs which also have an intermediary entity, the delegates. So in this type of DAO, token holders, they can choose a delegate who they believe will represent their interests well and delegate their voting power to them. And then the delegates will actually be the ones that are voting in the DAO. Sometimes this is mandatory, so in order to be able to vote with your tokens, they need to be delegated. Of course, you can also always delegate them to yourself, but this step is needed. And other times, this is only optional. And then in the third case, which we saw in the very beginning, delegates don't even exist. Okay, so with that, we're set up to look at what we did in this work. So we started by doing a categorization on all the attack vectors that there are on DAOs. So those that have been exploited before, those that have been theorized about, as well as some novel ones. And then with this knowledge, we went ahead and we distilled a list of risk factors, so risks that DAOs are facing, and also empirically measure how at risk some DAOs are. And the final thing we do is then we also discuss some safeguards. In this presentation, I will actually mainly focus on the first part, so a categorization of the attack vectors. I will go through like a high-level categorization and also provide some examples to hopefully make it very understandable. Okay, so this brings me to the first family of attack vectors we look at, which are bribing and coalition attacks. So you can think of this as an attacker an attacker paying some money in order to be able to change some votes. So for instance, as we saw in the last presentation before lunch actually, what could happen is that you're just buying the voting power of a token, but not the token itself. Now on this slide, I'm also listing various attack vectors in the family, but I will not go into details here on all of them, but instead focus on one of them, which are vote buying protocols. So they do exactly what I said previously, but let's look at an example of such a vote buying protocol, which is Paladin. So basically, Paladin allows you, if you're a governance token holder, to deposit your tokens in this protocol. And then anyone can come and borrow the voting power associated with the token, so not the token itself, for a period of time. And what I'm showing on the slide is the liquidity as the percentage of the proposal threshold, so the amount of tokens required to create a proposal in a DAO for 3 different DAOs, so Compound, Uniswap, and Idle. And what you can see here is that while there was liquidity in this protocol at some point, for instance, for Idle, there was liquidity which was 70% of the proposal threshold, currently there's really no liquidity in this protocol. But still, the existence of such a protocol does present a potential risk to a DAO in the future if more users were to go ahead and deposit their governance tokens. So, with that, we're on to our next family of attack vectors, which is what we call token acquisition attacks. And what these to me are somewhat of the simplest nature. What happens here is that an attacker buys a huge or acquires the possession of a huge amount of the governance tokens, or is already in possession of them, but then we are in the case where delegation is required. So they then sort of, instead of acquiring the actual tokens, they only acquire the voting powers by delegating the tokens. And here, let's first look at an example of a token purchase, of the token purchase attack vector, by looking at an attack that happened on the Index DAO approximately 6 months ago. So Index is actually a protocol which, prior to this attack on the DAO, the actual protocol had been attacked. And the protocol after that was dead. Nothing much was going on here anymore. But the DAO of the protocol still had some tokens in its treasury, which were worth around $90,000 during the time this attack on the DAO then took place. An attacker basically noticed that there were these tokens still lying around in the treasury, and also noticed that the NDX token, so the governance token for this DAO, was quite cheap. So what the attacker did, it bought $4,000 worth of NDX token, created a proposal that would allow the attacker to gain complete control of the treasury, so empty all the tokens in there, as well as mint unlimited amounts of the NDX token. This is important because that also allows the attacker to empty out decentralized exchanges pairs with the NDX token. And yes, so basically the attacker would have been able to take complete control of the DAO, at least its treasury. You might think now, well, maybe the attacker was lucky and this went unnoticed because this is a protocol where nothing had happened anymore for 2 years. But still, it was noticed. Oh, the attacker obviously voted in favor of its own proposal. It was noticed. And then there was a call to action on Twitter by one of the founders of the Index protocol, asking everyone that had their tokens delegated, so this is a DAO that requires delegation, to go ahead and vote against this proposal. And actually, they were able to amass just enough against votes to prevent the attack. Interestingly, though, this all wouldn't have been necessary, because what the attacker did, the attacker actually immediately sold all the NDX tokens again after creating the proposal and voting for it. What this means is that anyone on the blockchain could have canceled the proposal because the attacker had fallen below the proposal threshold. So in the end, the attack failed, obviously, because they had enough against votes, but it shows how many complexities are there, both from the attacker's side as well as those that try to protect against an attack. And you might be happy for the index DAO now because they were able to prevent this attack. However, there was a second attack right afterwards. I don't have much time to look at it now, though. So then let's also look at one more example of the attack vectors in this family, which is whale delegation. If you, and here we're really concerned with DAOs that have delegation as a requirement. So only tokens that are delegated are able to vote in a proposal. And on the website, on here you see now a picture which you might be familiar with if you look at some website that display votes on a DAO. So every circle is one of the delegates, and the size of the circle represents their voting power, and the color, in this case green, is a forward for a proposal. What we're not seeing here, though, is any potential addresses or wallets that hold tokens or a significant amount of tokens which are undelegated. So you might wonder, why do we care about this? And for that, I first want to look at how the voting process or the timeline of a vote on a proposal looks like in one of these DAOs. So first, we have the proposal creation. Then we have some delay until a snapshot is taken. And the snapshot is important because it measures the voting power of everyone in the DAO. So it measures the voting power of all delegates. And all tokens that have not been delegated before the snapshot do not have a voting power. Then we have a voting period, voting ends, another delay, a proposal is executed. But the thing I want to focus on is this first delay, which is only one block for quite a few DAOs actually out there. And what this means is that if there's a whale out there that is holding a lot of these governance tokens, or just acquired them, for instance, then they can go ahead, delegate all these tokens, create a proposal, and the snapshot is only one block afterwards. So if they then have a majority of the voting power, there's basically nothing we can do against it. And then we were interested in, are there any of these whales out there? So here on the plot for 6 DAOs, you see the number of externally owned addresses. So this is only wallets, not smart contracts, that hold what we call a majority stake. So if they delegate, they suddenly have a majority of a voting power in the DAO. And actually, there's quite a few of them, at least for these 6 DAOs that you're seeing on the slide. So sometimes there's even 5 of them. So this is a potential risk that DAOs face. And this also brings me to the next attack family, which we call human-computer interaction attacks. And these are the types of attack vectors that lie at the intersection between humans and blockchains, so computers. And basically, what they take advantage of is not flaws in the logic of a protocol or the code of a protocol, but instead of the infrastructure and the human behavior that is involved in the governance process. And here, I want to focus on user interface issues. So if many users, or at least a good subset of users that vote in DAOs, they probably use aggregator websites that have a convenient UI where you can do your votes, such as Tally. So now on the slide, you're seeing how this might look like. Here's a proposal on the Arbitrum DAO. And now if you vote here, when you're signing the transactions, the actual input arguments of the function are not displayed in an easily understandable way. So it makes it quite hard for a user voting to be sure that the vote is being recorded on the blockchain as they intended it to be. And this can be an issue. And what really shows this is that Tally, which is this website, and I think the biggest one of them, was actually recording votes incorrectly for months. So back in 2020, Tally was recording all votes against the proposal by mistake as votes in favor of a proposal. And this went unnoticed for a 4-month period. So we don't think that there was any malicious behavior. It was probably just an oversight. But it still goes to show how much of a risk these user interface issues can be for DAOs, especially because they're often not open source. Okay, So then we're on to our last family of attack vectors, and the ones I'm going to spend the least amount of time, but probably those you might be most familiar with, because these are the ones that most DeFi protocols are also vulnerable to. So this is code and protocol vulnerabilities. So attacks in this family, what they exploit is any flaws in the logic or code of a protocol, the DAO itself, so the governance, or potentially also the protocol it governs, because oftentimes they're interconnected, so that you can empty the treasury of a DAO, for instance, with an attack on the protocol. I'm not going to go into any details here, basically, but what I still want to note is that the first attack on a DAO, so the attack on the DAO, was actually a code vulnerability attack. What we did next then is that we went and we looked for some real-life attacks on DAOs. And in this table, every row is an attack. Don't be worried if the fonts are too small, but for each of these attacks, we indicate whether it was successful, what the damages were, and so on. But the part I really want you to focus on is the right part of this table. So for each of these attacks, we indicate which attack vector was used, and the attack vectors are color-coded by the family of attacks that they come from. And the part that I want to draw attention to is that they seem to be almost equally distributed across all these attack vectors, or attack families. So that means that DAOs really have threats coming from all directions. And at the same time, quite a few attacks actually use multiple attack vectors, which probably makes protecting against these attacks even more complex. And what we did as a second step then as well is we looked at some academic papers and some audits, and also looked at what vulnerabilities they discovered. And there we then also it's also color-coded which attack vector they were coming from. And what we notice here is that especially for the audits, there's little focus placed on these attack vectors, which are a bit more complex, also involve potentially the human nature of DAOs, while most of the focus is really placed on the code and vulnerability attacks. So there seems to be a gap between what audits are looking at and where the attacks are coming from in real life. Okay, so what we did next then is that with this knowledge on the threats that DAOs face, we came up with a list of risk factors. So you can see the list of risk factors on the slide here. So for instance, voter apathy is of course a problem, because if there is low voting turnout, this is a problem for a DAO because it's cheaper to attack the DAO. There are many more on the slide here. I'm not going to go through the details of them. But what I want to mention is that for each of them, we then come up with measures in order to measure them empirically, to be able to say how at risk a DAO is for them. And we do an empirical vulnerability analysis then for the set of DAOs that you can see shown on the slide. So they basically represent the biggest DAOs in the Ethereum ecosystem. So they govern the biggest DeFi protocols, or they have the largest treasuries. And there are some layer 2s on there as well, so Arbitrum and Optimism. And here again, I don't have time to really show you all the results, but feel free to check out the table for the paper for a big table that summarizes it all. I'm just going to leave you with some small comments here, which is, for one, that we find that small DAOs often fare worse. And then there's also some concrete things, such as what we saw before. So there are multiple wallets out there that hold what we refer to as a majority stake in a DAO, which is a potential threat. Sometimes these are actually also exchanges, such as Binance, for instance. And then also we find that token acquisition attacks, like the one in the index case, have often been profitable for some of these DAOs in the past. And now the final thing we do in the paper is we also discuss some safeguards. I don't have time to look at them, but I hope that if you find time, you might have time to check them out in the paper. And this brings me to the conclusion. So what we wanted to do in this work is we wanted to summarize the knowledge out there on the threats that DAOs face. And one of the main things we find is that the threats faced by DAOs really come from a very broad range of attack vectors, which makes it ever so complex to protect against them, because you need to be constantly on the outlook for potential new threats coming up, which are quite different to the ones that you were familiar with before. And what this really goes to show is that we believe that DAOs should engage very early and continuously, because things can change also if the value of their token changes, for instance, with the possibility of an attack, and continually be monitoring some potential risk factors. And we hope that our work can, at least to some extent, provide some guidance there. So with that, thanks for the attention. The paper QR code is there. It will also be updated soon. So, like many other papers, we're currently preparing it for a submission next week. And thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I just have a question. Have you compared these attack groups in terms of potential financial loss? Like these different categories of attacks in terms of...
Okay. Actually, we didn't look at that. I can quickly go back to the table, maybe. Sorry, this is reacting slower than anticipated. No, we didn't look at it, but it's a good question. We should look at it. But you can see the damages listed where they are applicable. So sometimes it's a bit more difficult to say what the DAO damages were. Sometimes in DAO is just overtaken for control to some extent, not for economic damages. But where there were economic damages, we do indicate them over there. But we didn't split it up by category. But it would be a good thing to do.
Any other questions? I have one, which is, did you see any successful forks in DAOs for treasury or control?
We saw one fork in a DAO. I don't remember the details, though, entirely. I think there was also one DAO which just separated. So all DAO members came together, decided we want to, I don't know the correct English word currently, but get rid of the DAO, put in a different way, and then they all got parts of the treasury proportional to the voting powers they had. So in this case, it's not an attack because everyone was equally off in the end.
Great, well, let's...
Are you planning to publish this result as an ongoing dashboard to track the DAOs? Like, do you think that would be something useful?
Yeah, that would surely be something useful. It's a good idea. We should definitely look into it. And also, if anyone knows of any attacks on DAOs that are maybe not listed here, I would be very happy if you could just send me a Twitter thread or a news article or whatever information you have on it so that we can include it.
Well, let's thank Lioba.